Welcome to Carl DeGregorio's Desk Session 80. Moving along. 80. That's a good one. 80. That's a good anniversary. That's a good age to make it to. That's older than many companies, older than many people get to live. 80 is a round number. It's an even number. It is it's a wide receivers number. I don't know whose, but it usually starts at the tight ends, and the wide receivers get the start in the 80s. 80, the year of 1980 was, I guess, a big year. It's politically speaking, stuff was getting crazy in 80. There was a big Olympics. There we go. We finally fell on to what it is. Netflix currently, so it's a current reference, even if it is an ancient reference. And I don't know how many more of these they are literally making almost an annual documentary about the Miracle on Ice. And now that the USA won this year, who knows? It's probably not quite as inspiring, although they did beat their rivals in Canada for North American supremacy in hockey. And hockey's not a resonant sport for me, so that's about as far as I can go. That is about as far as I can go. I know who Gretzky is, and I know who Mark Messier is. I've heard of these names like Rocket Richard and Guy Lafleur. But that's about it. Bobby Orr is always most of the things I know that I don't already know, I've learned many times intergenerationally and for sports references that I didn't know in the first part. But crossword puzzle clues will often have Mel Ott was a baseball player. Mel Ott played for the Giants. I think he's in the 500 home run club. But his name will always come up in a crossword puzzle because you're getting those short clues. You need OTT. So Mel Ott, Bobby Orr is always a clue for a hockey player in a crossword puzzle. And things like the Thin Man Dog is Asta. I learned that. I probably should have known just from general geography, but Agra is where the Taj Mahal is. And so all of these things all come from crossword puzzle solving, and eventually they become fill-ins because they are the same clue in every puzzle, and it's just a way for them to make other things across and down fit, I think. So they need the necessary short names. And you'll get Gina, Lola, Brigida, you'll never get her full name, won't be required, but you'll need a Gina, so that's a short 4-letter. And, the dream for many egotists such as myself, and, the I made it quotient used to be for some of the literary set or the people who think they little bright nerdy kids, like to make it to a crossword puzzle clue is a level of achievement that many seek. So actor DeGregorio, and then 4-letter answer Carl, that's a goal, but that's I gotta get cooking, and I don't know what they would do with that those letter combos are tough. And and I guess a Jeopardy clue would be another one. But 80 being a transition, I recently Boogie Nights showed up on one of the streamers, great P.T. Anderson movie, which if you watch the first 40 minutes is a joyride, and then it turns on a dime and becomes a descent. So it's literally like that. And these days, I find myself only able to kind of get through the ascent rather than the descent. And so, it's sort of left there at that mark. Basically, when he's introduced to cocaine, right? That is the fuse to the bomb for the addict is the first time, right? And I speak about it in my show to stay a little bit on topic. My one-man show, I do talk about it. I won't sort of spoil it for you, but I do have a vivid memory of the first time I had a drink, and it wasn't. I mean, everybody like snuck a wine or had a pull of a beer before it was, but that sort of surreptitious teenage getting around a group of, I don't even know how it was acquired. It was I just remember it vividly, and I talk about it. So, and it didn't really set off a fuse in my case, although eventually I did spend too much time with it, self-medicating, I suppose, and that kind of gets me to the theme of 80 and the transition, and the reason I even bring up Boogie Nights is because they are taking it in their thematic that the 79 to 80 represented in that milieu and in that world of pornography. That represented the last, whatever they call the golden age, when things were shot on film, while it was smut, prurient, and XXX, and it was dirty and probably not healthy people. But when it was shot on film, it's about the transition from film and theaters to VHS and to, even more prurient things, and things getting more extreme in the 80s in that world of pornography. And if you really think about any of the technologies and the factor that is always taken out, and this is a terrible launch, but this is what it comes down to. It was a different set of people who would go to a theater to see that stuff. Once it could be unshamed and it could be done at home, or the worst sort of walk of shame was through the saloon doors in the back of a video store, or you could do mail order. As soon as that became, that's where the stuff ratcheted up in terms of extremity, I would say. And another good example of one of the most successful books of all time. I spoke last week about how, more people have read the Firm by John Grisham than have read Infinite Jest. So I was comparing the idea of what really gets out there to the masses and or captures anybody's attention. And now reading is, I don't even know where it is on the list of leisure activities. And that was probably declining even in 1980, but there were still commercially viable bookstores for a while, and even in a mall. And so all this stuff sort of has, you can see the ramifications of all these transitions and these changes of turning a decade, or turning from a 79 to an 80. And that's why I'm talking about transition. And it's kind of quizzically, maybe not so coincidentally, it does make you think about where I'm going with change, right? But back to the point of one of the best-selling books of recent history, and maybe it might even be the number one Kindle book of all time, if I'm not mistaken, was 50 Shades of Grey. And the reason the book did so well is because of its smutty nature, but it's a female. I think it was an e-book. So if you think about reading out in public, as a former New Yorker, it was always, I would always I'd take the covers off, the dust covers off the book, because I didn't want them getting torn. And so I would go around, so you could maybe peep my book title on the spine if you were looking, but I always read a book without the cover on it, not out of any particular shame, but out of saving the cover to put back on the shelf, and there wouldn't be tears, and the book would be in good shape because you preserved it. I have hardcovers all over. Those are mostly paperbacks, or trade paperbacks. But the reasoning, for example, a secretary riding the A train with her skirt, pantsuit skirt combo, whatever she might be wearing, and the running shoes instead of the high heels to get to the office, that sort of cliche look in New York, that they working girl kind of thing. If you're on a Kindle, so the Kindle became popular as a way to store books and to get off paper and to be an e-reader. The number one sale of that was 50 Shades of Grey, because you wouldn't be ashamed to be, everybody knew what that book was about. And so to be caught reading it would, be more grief than you wanted to put up with. And what a quaint notion to be ashamed of reading a book about someone getting spanked. You know what I'm saying? Compared to what is just permissible and permissive these days, in terms of that. But the quaint notion was that the book was made kind of symbiotically or simultaneously made more popular by the availability of being able to closet what you read on the thing. And so what I'm trying to say is, when you can stay kind of closeted with your picadillos, let's just leave it at that, it drives things into shame cycles, if you will. You know what I mean? Or it leads you to be more curious and more bold. And so you've heard the phrase keyboard warriors, or Mike Tyson saying, everybody, this internet thing, this social media thing has made too many people talking shit, and they're not going to get punched in the face as a consequence of talking shit, and they get too fucking comfortable with it. And that, I am elaborating on Mike Tyson's quote. You can look it up. He says it more succinctly than I just did, but that's the issue. And so I think it has something to do, like I think I spoke about last week, but it's the single use, which all it does, and really all it really does, is it means you, in a household, and I've been saying for a while to anyone who would listen, that it's all TV, right? And it's all newspaper. None of the media's media, and you can package it as a podcast. You can package it as a blog. You can package it as anything you want. It's just all media, right? And the idea that it's maverick now, I mean, I think it's been around long enough that you start to see what works online and what used to not work on TV. But it really comes down to the businesses and technologies. You want to put them in as many people's hands as possible. So if you took one household had one phone. Now, if you have 6 people living under one roof, they have 6 phones. And then now that you've made media available, you have 6 stereos, you have 6 televisions. And then you have multiples, right? So then you start to have devices, so that screens on top of screens on top of screens on top of screens. And so what does that take away? The communal experience. And then what happens is that rude behavior, that idiosyncratic, I'm alone now, I pick my nose, nobody's watching. People are like more that drain into the phone. It takes away a little bit of the shame, or people forget that they're out and about. And this may sound like a boomerang, but it's part of what erodes the idea. So it's a double-edged sword. So the movie-going experience, while it can be uplifting, and if you think about, there's a whole cottage industry of podcasts talking about older films because maybe they're better. Well, were they better, or were they just more of the times they represented? And so the craftsmanship that went into filmmaking had a reward, cultural reward, as well as a financial reward. And it's where the height of technology was at filming. There was a time when the motion picture probably, it's one technology toppling another. And then that's where you go the way of the dodo bird, or talking films, right? Babylon, which was a interesting, pretty good, I thought it was a good movie, was more like 3 movies in one, but it bombed, notorious bomb in the movie, as a successful movie. It may be reviewed better in hindsight, but, and fun fact, I actually got to audition for it, but Babylon is about sort of that Boogie Nights almost transition from celluloid to video, but this was the silent era to the talking era. And I think the Margot Robbie character was a composite, but it was a very hard transition for a lot of the silent actors, because like Rudy Valentino notoriously had a meek voice, and so he was the chic and he was this debonair dude in a silent movie, but he had a terrible speaking voice. And I think she kind of played that. She couldn't lose her accent, right? And that was in that movie. But that I fear I fear that is what is in front of a lot of actors. Similarly, MTV made Video Killed the Radio Star was the first video. And rarely do these people get these things right, but that prescient debut video was probably because they happened to have had a video, and that was the song they played. I don't know. It's almost like they commissioned it to be the first song on MTV, and how right they were. And I think what's happening now is I wouldn't be doing this if it were 1980. If I graduated drama school in the late 80s, I wouldn't have to think about my online presence. I wouldn't have to think about do I do social media or do I not? And maybe that was an apex that I was alive. I wasn't too young to participate, but I was not, I wasn't in the stream yet, and now I'm in the stream, and I've been in the stream a long time. And so like that transition, that 79 into 80, that video into film into video, the talkies into the silent era into talkies, we're on one of those right now. And I fear it's the AI. I don't know that I think maybe it's a little more subtle than we're going to be replaced by synthetic actors. I think we've already sort of noticed that the celebrity or the aspirant in acting has to be a hyphenate, and the influencer is the actor. And so the silent era actors who were stoically angular and had big chins, and they just ate up scenery with that nonverbal acting, they had to fall by the wayside of the talkies, and then that was just a gimmick. And then to stay in I think Charlie Chaplin still worked in silence up until I guess he did The Little Dictator and when he made that famous speech. But and then you find out the dude had an English accent the whole time, and he was sort of like a hobo, Americana hobo kind of thing, and you didn't know that. And so what's happening now is a lot of people are in the old paradigms, and I hate to say it, but a lot of actors get themselves in trouble because off script they are less savvy about what comes out of their mouths than we all are. I've done 80 of these. I'm doing the 80th one. I bet you could cherry pick some incendiary things I've said, but I think part of my slow growth, part of my slow connectivity, my numbers being low, rather than being mad at myself, is because I am glacially approaching this in a glacier pace, rather than losing myself in front of a lot of people and saying stuff that I might regret. And I'm aware of that. I'm probably too cautious, and then that isn't what moves the needle. And I'm not saying that as a way to excuse or to pat myself on the back for staying anonymous. I'd like for people to hear what I have to say, but I have to really temper it with being able to back it, live it down. I curse a lot. I've been noticing that. I put out, that may be enough to relegate me to a sideline of not okay guy, because I drop F-bombs all the time. Maybe that's quaint a notion for me, but I always find, going back to the porn analogy, it's always hilarious that sometimes you'll see someone say, oh my gosh, because they don't want to take the Lord's name in vain, but they're laying down in a porno. It's kind of goofy the way we get selective about our sacred cows, or we get selective about what's a bridge too far. And I think that, again, is all idiosyncratic. And so if you grew up in an era before the internet, before the cell phone, before the only thing you could customize in your life back in the day would be the walls of your bedroom, the graffiti on your notebook. Every car came standard, but I guess the options were AC and power windows and maybe a cassette deck, right? Now, when you get your phones, the amount of things you have to decide on what to customize it so that you don't get rings. What's the ring? There's how many ringtones are in that fucking thing? Infinite. And so all that selectivity just to get a rent-a-car started, it's like it becomes a glut, and it becomes the idea that, and what it does is that it does encourage the individual, and I guess they would say in some circles that encourages the wrath of and the rash of narcissistic behavior. And maybe it's a little overstated, and I would never debate the idea that it's a narcissistic culture and that narcissism rewarded. And and I would also say that I have narcissistic tendencies like anybody else. If I'm willing to cop to it, does that mean I'm not? I don't know. I wrote a first-person memoir, and you don't know my name, so what's my memoir about? Do you know what I'm saying? I understand that it's rich for anyone with an IMDb page to call people narcissists. But if, in my quaint notion of art and being an actor, and I was hoping to maybe let my work speak for itself, and that is just a rare air that I just don't have to, I don't get to participate into just yet. And to be an enigmatic actor, to be like Al Pacino, who you don't hear much from, except he's constantly working. I guess Leo is the last guy to sort of be able to stay somewhat anonymous. Not meaning that he's not besieged by paparazzi, but everything is from a telephoto lens with that guy. Similarly, Tom Cruise. But nowadays, and that's the problem, Chalamet's got to be out there campaigning himself, conquering social media, and not just being an actor, because, to stay relevant to. And then when they mingle the economics and the star ratings and all these things, like he thinks he doesn't have a choice, and maybe he doesn't. I don't know. And maybe one of the most fortunate things you can be is just a working character actor who works constantly, and you're that guy. And maybe that's what my new aspiration is to be. And certainly I'm not playing a young leading man anymore. So, but in a way to play ball, you have to at least come to attention. And my thinking about all this is that as long as I can live with it, and as long as I'm fairly searchable, and I guess because you've heard, there's so much content out there, but you've heard from casting people saying, does the number of your followers matter? It probably does for the younger set, but it wouldn't matter for someone in my age bracket. And it can't hurt. And so my whole thing is to have a presence that can help the yes, because they are going to look you up. And so when they look you up, what does your Google search look like? And outside of dropping an F-bomb, can I live down the things I'm putting out there? And maybe I'm sure I could have this stuff twisted and clipped out and make me look like an asshole. And that's the risk you take, right? That is the risk you take, in any endeavor. At least though, as an actor, you have the veneer and the shield of fiction, and it's a character. And that was what was tricky about being a stand-up comic, because you can say it's a character, but when Andrew Dice Clay got in all kinds of heat, it was directed at him. And the separation may be, it's a character, but it's a tougher delivery system. Because yes, it's a character, but it's also a self volunteer. All that material is self. It's similar to a farmer's market. He's putting his produce on display, so it's a character. But yeah, you created the character. You stand behind those words. And I've also heard in acting classes and and throughout my years of study, that the thing that separates better actors from lesser actors is you may not be the writer, but you are the one who, if it comes out of your mouth with intention, you are signing off on that. Meaning that whether or not you can live with it, that's why the weight of Make My Day or any of these things that are become iconic. I don't know that most of those one-liners that you are familiar with that become de rigueur in the culture, the actor didn't write them. And so the onus is on the writer if it were libelous, or slander. But, how many times do you see a singing show and they say, I'm singing Natural Woman by Aretha Franklin, and it's not by Aretha Franklin. It was completely obliterated for all history to even be attempted, but it's originally by Carole King. And so while the actors seldom write their own shit, in rare cases, when it comes out of their mouth, it gets attributed to them, or at very least their character. I'm the king of the world. Do you think of, and who wrote the Titanic script? Was it James Cameron, or was it a commissioned script that he decided he was going to blow out? I don't know, but you put that on him. And so as an actor, you have to that is the tightrope you walk. And I think it's these self-inflicted wounds of sand, but it's impossible under that microscope to not have missteps, It's impossible not to have missteps when you're going off the cuff like that. And so, and it's a navel gazing, and it's all for what? And, that's the issue that we are faced with. And I set these down. I wanted to talk about transitions. I bought a comb. I want to thank my girlfriend because, you don't ever, there's a funny story when we first started dating. I was getting dressed one night, she was over, and we were going out, and I put on this, I had these, I don't know if you ever go through these periods as an adult male. I wear jeans or sweats every day of my life, and occasionally you throw on a suit for hopefully more celebration than sorrow, but, a lot of times you wear a suit for a bad funeral or whatever, but, so sometimes you just notice that. You're like, Jesus, I wear jeans every day of my life, and so, I think one time I was getting dressed, and they were still like a jean cut, but they were like khaki colored jeans, like Calvin Klein pants. And then I had this goofy shirt that I didn't buy, someone bought for me, but I still rocked it because it was like I got teary-eyed when I got it. It was like one of those, bowling type cut shirts, short sleeve, but it had like dragons on it. Okay, I got it. But it wasn't like an Ed Hardy shirt, but it was like a knockoff, but like it was gaudy, but I thought it was gaudy in a muted tone. But when I put it on with the khakis, I just looked like, I didn't know this at the time, but I looked like, my girlfriend tried that, and we were just starting out. She said to me, "You sure you want to wear that?" And I was like, I was trying to do that, like probably before, these manosphere douchebags. I was probably hearing like, you shouldn't let a woman dictate to you. And I said, don't tell me how to dress. And I was just trying to like buck up, and she goes, okay. And so we went out, and as we were crossing the street to go to the restaurant, a street light hit me, and it shone on my tan shirt and my tan pants. And I said, what the fuck am I wearing? And I'm like, I look like I look like Steve Irwin. Like I look like I'm on a safari. You know what I mean? I look like the English soldiers in Gandhi, and that's not a great look. And it's definitely what I wasn't going. I just wanted to look mature and a little bit dressed up, and I just blew it. And we laugh about that to this day. And she said, "Oh, you were rocking your Garanimals," which is I get the reference, but I never had Garanimals. But and if you don't know what those are, they were like you match the animal on the top and the bottom. It was for like kids learning how to get dressed by themselves and shit. And there's nostalgia for that, and that's dating myself. But I say that to say, she was right, and I let her be right after I humiliated myself, dressed like a fucking a park ranger voluntarily. And we laugh about it today. But she's also loosens me up about, like, I'm combing my hair. I haven't owned even for, like, when you're playing a character in an acting class or on a self-tape, like, I don't ever change my look, my hair. And I bought a box of combs because I was literally rummaging through my entire house. I didn't have a hairbrush or combs. I would just go like that, you know. And now I'm going like this, and I'm taming down, curly hair, and it's new to me, and it's a transition, and it's letting her be a guide. And I don't know if it ultimately is a good idea or a bad idea. I'm trying to be less vain, but trying something new. There is some professional decision making to go, and I don't want to go into that. That's between me and so decision making going on in my life. What am I going to do for support? And as I get further into this, and the more I've sort of had time to myself, and had auditions and just sort of seeing it differently and working on the show, and I'm getting antsy because I have a lot of energy, which I think is a lot of good things because of working out and getting my foot healed, and now I have energy for the gym, which is then making me think I have energy for other things, and and without the day job situation worked out just yet, I think about that, but I also think maybe it's just gonna hopefully finally be the thing I want to do, which is a hodgepodge of acting gigs and voiceover, and just hopefully I can piecemeal it together and maybe make this transition from talkies, from silent to talkies. Maybe my life is in a transition, and do you go with where do you take the plunge, because even if it wasn't the post office, or if it wasn't the family business, like I have been fortunate, knock on wood, I've always had that stable job, and now I don't, and that that was always the rub for an actor. How do you stay alive in between the gigs, And, this is not a young man's story. Like, I mean, this is a young man's story, right? We're Chalamet, that homeboy's not even 30 yet, And and I'm not comparing myself to him. I'm just saying that, and so in these transitions, in these thoughts, and in these turning 80 on the desk session, and suffering some losses in the family and in my girlfriend's situation, sometimes it does, obviously the ticking of the clock does come into play. And I guess I'm sort of in my Dylan Thomas, who probably died before he was 40, I think, or maybe 42, died on a bar stool in the White Horse Tavern, I'm pretty sure. But that's what he's talking about with the rage. Don't go quietly into that good night. Or Neil Young said it's better to burn out than fade away. And and the Who said, I hope I die before I get old. And they're all old. And knock on wood, that's the blessing and the hope that we all get to go there. And yet, I've always had that twisted perspective of wanting being younger around older people. So and I never thought I'd get to, that's the other thing you hear all the time. Who the fuck is that dude looking back at me in the mirror, but in a twisted way. I think I'm hoping, in the way I have to reframe and what I need to do for my materials toward the industry, and what I'm trying to put out there is maybe I finally, when you're a precocious kid, or when you're a heady guy and you're trying to it's not even intellectual. it's not as interesting coming out of a young guy's face, these deep thoughts about nonsense, what it might ultimately be. But I'm like, yeah, and I can only be where I'm at, but I'm growing into my type. If that type is even relevant, we don't know. But I had a bit I had a bit in my set where I'm just like, I basically was like, I'm waiting for Danny Aiello and I'm waiting for Danny Aiello and it helps when you remember the bit, but I'm basically waiting for Danny Aiello and see, I can't even pull it up. Joe Montana, like I'm waiting for those guys to croak so then I can fill in for the sort of older Italian dad, the Papa Don't Preach video. But you find out these guys look so old that Danny Aiello's probably 41 in that video. Robert Loggia, those venerable guys, Joe Bologna, all those venerable Paisan guys, character actors. And so I'm trying to say that I can look forward to that if this if this AI social media thing doesn't just sort of take us off a cliff where no one cares anymore. But, I've been in plays that the joke always was that you go on if there's more people in the seats than there are on stage, then you perform. And I think when I wrote and produced a play in New York, we had the exact amount of people in the seats and so it was a push. And so I said, it's a push. The play had a sports sort of backdrop, so I was like, it's a push. So we performed for 4 people. But when you're doing Shakespeare and stuff like that, and there's 15 people backstage, and there's guys playing Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears, and the idea, I think, is that you have to have more, but we've worn out 9 audience members probably with a cast of 15. But the idea of like friends, Romans, countrymen, that lend me your ears, like that, the audience, it represents the friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears, and that's why you're breaking through and you're doing the soliloquy. And if you stage it right, you bring the audience in, and you don't need extras on stage to be the friends, Romans, countrymen. And that harkens back to sort of pulling for Hamnet. I think Jessie Buckley, right? That's the Oscars of this weekend. That she's shooting. If there were ever a shoe-in for the victory, it's that. But we'll see. I think Chloe Zhao deserves it too. But anyway, it's all subjective, and we all hope to even get there, right? And so these transitions and where I hope to be, and it also, I guess when I was in I take a shower before I do these, like a lot of people, they think best in the shower, and that's probably because of the lack of screen time. And if you think about it, I gotta keep an eye on my screen time. I've been doing crossword puzzles on paper and leaving my phone in a different part of the house, just but then your girlfriend calls in a panic because you've been sitting on the couch doing crosswords for 3 hours, and you're supposed to pick up your phone, and it increases anxiety, right? Sort of like drinking, back in the day, you would the 2 to 3 is perfect, right? You feel the day wash off you. Famously, and I agreed with him to some degree, Anthony Bourdain said, I dare you to have a better tasting beer than that beer at the end of the bar, at the end of brutal dinner service, where the chef gets to post up at the bar or at the next place after dinner service. That first frosty mugged cold beer, that first pull, that earned pull of a beer, it doesn't get much better than that. And I agree with him. But what happens is when you start to go past that comfort stage, the anxiety that you wake up with, that being in the hole the next day with a hangover, that's kind of what we're doing to our nervous systems in the sense on these. If there were hours of the day you weren't in contact with anybody and not taking in anybody's thoughts but your own, or at least you were talking to people out there. And if you get rid of retail and brick and mortar and, all this stuff, it's just where the conveniences lay and where drudgery is alleviated, I say yay. And where there is a place to connect, I say no, right? And I think, so when you're in the shower, if that's where you start to notice your thoughts, it's because you're isolated, you're alone. It's a form of meditation. So I take a shower before I come out here, and I have higher highfalutin thoughts than I do when I sit down, because then I got to set this all up. I don't leave this stuff racked up, and that's a goal, to someday have enough space to dedicate just to, studio time. But in my thoughts about what I talk about today, it wasn't going to be about the talkies and Babylon and my ramblings about my hair and dressing like a manila envelope. And then having things set up where I am dodging a text right now. Not dodging, I just can't address it right now because it happened as soon as I was about to start. So I am learning. You don't have to take every call. You don't have to reply instantaneously. But that becomes that built-in anxiety in this culture that, you wouldn't hear from people for days, for months, and you didn't suspect they were in a bad way. But what I was thinking in the higher plane, if that's what it is, when you're meditative in the shower, I was thinking a lot about, this, and then now I can't even really formulate it because it was a rush of thoughts, and then to convert them into cogent speech is part of what makes us human, makes us artists. The metaphor, the thing that I don't think AI can do. But the point is, does anybody appreciate it enough, right? Does anybody know what they're losing? And it's like, that's the issue, right? And the meme I would create were I to do that, and I may have already mentioned this, but the scene where Robin Williams accomplished his Oscar-winning, the submission for the Oscar, the scene they play in the montage for the nominations was when, in Good Will Hunting, Robin Williams takes Will out of the office and they go and sit by the river, and he confronts Will about Will's aggression, his emotional aggression toward pressing buttons on a broken man. The therapist admitting, yeah, you got to me, kid. You hurt me. I thought about it all night. I stayed up all night thinking about what I would say to you after you hurt me. And then he does that famous speech about if I asked you about war, you would say, you would quote Shakespeare, once more into the breach, or you do St. Crispin's Day, or one of those things. And he goes, but you wouldn't know what it was like to hold one of your best friends and watch him die in your arms, because that guy went to Vietnam. And it's the point of experience and real human issues. And it's beautiful, and it's beautifully written, and it's to wise up a young kid. You don't know shit yet. And he goes, you're a genius, Will, and he says that, and I can't do, and he goes, but you're also an orphan. And if I told you I knew what that was like because I read Oliver Twist, and there he is using analogy. He's using comparison. He's using personal experience, eloquence. He's using all the human things that are now being hoovered up by AI. But I always, when they do the thing, human versus AI, Will is like the AI. He does it. It will never know, what it's like to watch someone pass that you loved, or to the joy of childbirth. These things we have to cling to that. It's also why I don't talk about politics, but it's also why when things get haywire in the world, it's like the great song Sting wrote, I hope the Russians love their children too. And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. But when you have people, and this is the thought, when you have people who, we're all gifted, and if your gifts are God-given and not man-given, sometimes you do everything to block them, or sometimes you're not aware you have them, or if you're lucky enough and the God-given talent correlates with an industry or a sport or an art, and it can be used. But we all have these innate gifts that are human and imperfect. But when you set up a society and you make these things material, and you make them competitive, and you make only in a competitive sort of keep track society do hyphenated words exist to belittle, right? So I deal with this, I don't hawk my book much anymore, but I have on my profiles that I'm an author, right? Because I published a book, right? And that's a verb, right? And a qualifying hyphen itself, published, is it can't be both ways. It can't be you're a hustler, you're independent, you're doing for yourself, you're pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. So that's inherent in self-published, isn't it? But when it's said to you, many times I used to sell my books off on stage. I would do a joke, and then I'd say, "You want to know how big an ego can get? Like a lot of what I'm talking about, I wrote in this book, and you could buy it. I was trying to have merch, and it was a book, which is terrible merch to have. If it ain't a T-shirt, it ain't merch. You know what I'm saying? But, I'd have these books at the shows, and, other comic clubs would go, "Oh, that's great. You got a book, self-published." And it was a way to to size me up to, to see if Simon, it is, because Simon & Schuster, you didn't see it in the book. So what I'm getting at something. And we all have our hang-ups. I got plenty. But that is a codified way. And maybe my gift isn't writing. It isn't even, who knows what it is. It may be interpersonal. And you can't, an AI may have more shit at its fingertips than I do, but it doesn't know what it's like to hit a room and change the atoms. And I'm not saying I do, but maybe I do. And I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything to be the height I am. So when these things pop up, politics, when we get away from who the fuck we are, I hope the Russians love their children too. And it sounds so damn pie in the sky, but I think it's when people, is success a Lamborghini? Is success a house on a hill? Yeah, for some, I guess. But, how you feel, whether you get to draw a breath with people, it's a million other metrics for success. And I don't think AI and art, in a way, whether it's good or bad, art, it has to be human derived, or something will be lost. And I guess that would be my case for it. So I have sort of lost my thrust and I've lost my ability to make sense. I just know that we are often led by people with man-given gifts, i.e. generational wealth, privilege, having the backing, and that is twisted into that's a value that also means something must be right about that person, and that may or may not be the case, as all I'm saying. And so when people who are envious of God-given gifts, you cannot make yourself run as fast as Usain Bolt, but that to envy his speed is futile, right? Because it's God-given, right? And he works hard, and the work ethic and all that stuff. And that's why we like sports, because that seems like these are gifted people who have found a way to connect their God-given gift with something that can exploit it or make it monetized. But when everything is man-given, then that's when the value system becomes, can you scale it? Can you sell it? Can you put, let's sell the phone, the idea of using the Alexander Graham Bell, when the inventor comes up with the idea, and then it's the marketeers, then somebody says, let's put one of these TVs, the vast wasteland. We were worried about TV rotting brains and MTV rotting brains. And now look what we do. We give everybody one. You get a fucking social security number, and you're going to get a phone. It's that ubiquitous. It's why wealth was built, on the backs of the fact that we put these things in everybody's hand. And all I'm saying is I could be broke as a joke, but I know I can make people laugh. I know I can speak with some feeling and try to, we can all say something to the cashier. We could all be, remembering, just like Robin Williams, that we don't know what somebody else is going through, And that doesn't mean you have to like it or even have to bury yourself in this do-gooder sense of like we should, I gotta leave the house, right? And so sometimes that shower thinking can confuse the issue. And I guess I'm just gonna wrap it up there and hope it wasn't too much of a ramble. And I really was digging last week's song. We did Jordan McKnight, "Give It to You," and I'll put that in the that will be the song that I'm trying to stagger it so that you got to stay to the end to hear what the new song is, and then you go blah blah blah, and then I'm accomplishing the playlist. But that was last week, and it brought me down a whole wormhole of Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, and then now this song this week on the list is called "Choose" by Color Me Bad. Now, again, very much of a dating, aging myself, but Color Me Bad had a big hit with "Sex You." "I Wanna Sex You Up" was a dope track. It was in the New Jack City soundtrack, and it was just a fucking universal crossover hit. It was pop, it was R&B, and it was from some cats. I think they were from Oklahoma. I think they're from Oklahoma City, and they were like a boy group, but they weren't a concocted group like in Orlando. They weren't put together by a Svengali. They were like a bunch of pals that decided that they wanted to be like New Kids or be like New Edition, and it was, I guess, late 80s, early 90s, right? And so Color Me Bad was this clique, and they had a Latin cat, they had a black cat who did like the spoken word raps, and then they had this sort of nondescript white kid who was like squinty eyed, and he was the lead singer. And then they had a dude with long curly hair, kind of lanky dude, kind of butt of all jokes, like there was a guy in 98 Degrees, sort of like that cat, and they were fly. And I really dug them because in the burgeoning R&B hip hop scene in New York, and that coming out of college, it was, if the social currency was definitely whether we talk, we can't revise it now. It was driven a lot by like your Puff Daddy and Hot 97 if you were in those clubs, and like, so it was a way you wanted to be down with urban black culture, but you also wanted to individuate. And so the fact that Color Me Bad was had a white integrated band, it was diverse, but it was like there was a white cat who had some funky soul and could sing, and then you had John B, who was a white cat. So I was definitely repping that because I wasn't trying to be other than I was, but you wanted to have ambassadors to the UN of pop culture, and so Color Me Bad was like a really good entry on the white tip. And so and then they had a couple other hits on that album. They had "I Wanna Sex You Up." They had "Mi Amor." So like they had a little Latin flavor, and "I Adore Mi Amor," and they even had like a Spanish version of it, or there was a Spanish verse. And then you had the up-tempo track. The one I really liked was "All for Love," right? So that's their first album. They were, this is so ridiculous that I'm trying to like give you the I'm trying to give you the Rolling Stone analog description of why Color Me Bad is an important band. But they and I've joked previously that I am the only motherfucker that bought their second album, and so "Choose" is from the second album. And I've been a late adapter to technologies, mostly because of finances. So I wasn't in the CD game, but one of the early CDs I bought was the second album, which "Choose" is on. And because Color Me Bad did so well with the first one, there was a lot of hot producers, like I think Quincy Jones, I think Teddy Riley. I think the whole album was compiled for their second effort to be give them some props as like R&B potentiality. And I'm sure the song charted. I didn't hear it out of thin air, and it wasn't like I was listening to album tracks, but "Choose" was was like a second hit, but it didn't do as well, and they faded away. But it's a very early 90s kind of sound, and it's got good vocals. And the thing I do when I'm jamming out is I'll get these thoughts in my head, and I'll, I remember songs, and I couldn't remember the track. I just remember kind of the swooping chorus was pretty good, and I remember writing the joke or the thing that I was the only guy who bought the second album that Color Me Bad had. So now that you have the ability to search, and that's where technology can be an asset to a brainiac or a trivia nerd or anything like that, I was like, what the hell? And so you go to Color Me Bad's page, and then you're like, oh, here's where they fell off, and then there is that second hit, and it was Choose. And so that's how it turns up on the playlist. And then back in the day when you had to buy a single or a 45 or whatever and play it out till you were sick of it, or you didn't get your fill of it on the radio, a lot of these were below the top 40. That's why this playlist is funky, because it's a lot of these things charted but didn't chart in, they weren't, if you didn't get your fill of certain songs by their ubiquity on the radio, then, I don't know why you'd have to go buy those songs. So I was always looking for that third tier hit or something that I wished would have gone further or stayed out there longer. And now with the ability to access this music, and so then you play it out until you're sick of hearing it, like you would if you had to buy it, and it doesn't cost you the same nowadays. And so that's how they show up on the playlist. So that's why I'm sharing this all-time playlist with you, because it's a sort of embarrassing, because it's not the one I'm thinking about. It doesn't have Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival as the greatest war song. It doesn't have, Born to Run as the song of rebellion. It doesn't have You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman by Aretha as the greatest R&B song, or What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. I mean, all of those to me were so played out that for me to throw that on a list, it defeats the purpose of, like, why would you make a playlist of songs that are Americana at this point? And so it's embarrassing, but it also is elucidating to what appeals to me. What about a song? Even, for me, I'm so into a certain genre of music, like Stevie B, Spring Love, like that's almost de rigueur to put on a playlist. But there's a whole lot of awesome freestyle that wasn't as big a hit. And so that's kind of where it's at. And that's where Choose by Color Me Bad is next on the playlist. And it's you'll hear it. It's a big sweeping chorus, and anything you ask me to, it's pretty good. So I'll leave it at that. This is Death Session 80, man. Transitions aren't always smooth, so I guess that's what this episode will leave you with. So I'll see you next week. Peace.